being here. It's kind of surreal to be speaking to a class because it doesn't feel like it was that long since I was in all of your shoes. I am the founder and CEO of Hitlist. It's an app I hope you all download. You can list places you want to travel, trips you want to take, and we alert you when there are cheap flights to get there. You can do things like set up for spring break, I want to go somewhere awesome, and it'll alert you when you can get super cheap flights. We've had like $292 round trip to India, $74 round trip to New York, this type of stuff. It actually happens kind of frequently, these crazy hacker fairs, and unless you're subscribed to a bunch of random email lists, a lot of times you miss them because they go very quickly. We're trying to make that process more transparent and more accessible to everyone. And build it into a really fun social app. We have a little under 500,000 users right now. We've never paid for our user acquisition, so it's all been organic. Our average user is a little older, sort of like 29, but it's a lot of fun, and I think you should all give it a try. A little bit of background on me, and also just a structure for this class. I guess the class is talking about failures, and I definitely have some mistakes I've made along the way, but I also thought it might make sense I can give, like, you know, the story of what we've done for like the first 15 minutes or so, and if it would be interesting to you, I want to share a few sort of hacks and things that I've learned to be a better business person and entrepreneur for about 15 minutes, and then we can do Q&A for the remaining 20. So I don't know if anyone wants to like keep time. I don't have a watch, and like give me a 15. Oh, there's a clock up there. Okay, we're good. So I did my undergrad at Harvard. I graduated in 2009 at the height of the financial crisis. I had no idea what I wanted to do, other than I wanted to be where things were different and changing. I thought I looked at the world as what would be the most like Moscow in the 90s, in the spring and summer of 2009. Because Moscow in the 90s, when the Soviet Union was collapsing, I always thought that that was a really fascinating period in history. And you had governments changing, society changing, business changing a lot, which just means tons of opportunities. So I looked at the world and I thought that there was a chance that Iran might be that way in 2009. So there was a big election that was happening that year, and there was a chance that there was going to be a big regime change and things would change. So I taught myself Persian. I got a study buddy who was like a Persian grad student to speak Farsi with me, or Persian. And I got all this prepared, and then the elections happened in June, and the government like totally crushed all of the opposition, and so I was sort of like, oh, well, that plan went out the window. I ended up teaching English in China. That was the only job I could get on short notice that would take me abroad. By the way, if any of you have any interest in traveling, teaching English abroad is like the easiest job ever to get. You're all fluent in English, presumably because you're here. It's an incredibly marketable asset, never forget that. If you're ever hard up for a job anytime, go and teach English somewhere. It'll be a really fascinating experience. Worked in China. It was the era of swine flu, and so the government actually shut down all of the sort of big camps and teaching programs. So I was out one of those, so I was out of a job, but they paid me my full salary. So I traveled around China, ended up working as a freelance journalist throughout Mongolia and Russia, and the Ukraine, and ended up in Istanbul. And I worked very quickly for CNN there, and then transitioned into private consulting. So I showed up in Istanbul having no idea what I wanted to do. I've been doing a little of this sort of freelance journalism. I met the CNN correspondent in a bar, and I said I wanted to be a journalist, and he was like, yeah, sure, you can stop by the office. And I was like, can I just work for you? And he was like, okay. And that was how I got my first job at CNN. And so I worked there. They didn't pay very well at all. In general, journalism doesn't. Transition into private market consulting. So it's sort of like when you're abroad, you just sort of show up and you look for things. And in general, if you are unlike other people around, which you probably will be as a sort of educated at a good US university, go somewhere where you're unusual. And you get a lot of different opportunities, so I never expected to end up in Oman, which is a random country in the Middle East, right next to Saudi Arabia, in sort of like 4 months after I graduated, interviewing for people from the government and people from BP and doing analysis and giving this to my bosses, but that was what I ended up doing. It's a very bizarre chain of events. So I ended up, one of my assignments was to figure out what the oil field production for this one oil field was, and what people like bankers and traditional consultants do is they're sitting in London or New York and they call the government minister, and the government minister says, we're producing 80 million barrels of oil or something like this, and they just sort of write that down and that goes into the system, and then somewhere down the line after a bunch of weird financial transactions they figure out that that was a complete lie. It was nowhere near 80 million barrels of production, and they have to figure out what went wrong. My job was to go and be on the ground and figure out what was happening, and I realized that basically the only way we could get reliable information was to have someone sit outside the oil field and count how many trucks were coming out every day. And so I was trying to recruit someone to do that, but I didn't want anyone from the sort of oil companies to know that I was doing that, so I went on couch surfing. Are any of you familiar with couchsurfing.com? It's a great place where you can figure out people to stay with. I recruited my couch surfing host to sit outside an oil field in Oman for 3 months and count how many barrels of oil came out. And this worked really well. He was very reliable. I paid him $10 a day, which was a very good wage. And I ended up sort of getting this role for getting this reputation for thinking creatively, and then I got more and more interesting projects. And to the point where I was at age 24 getting contracts where I was getting paid about tens of thousands of dollars a month, which was a really interesting position to be in. So I was sort of dropped into these various markets: Oman, Kuwait, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Syria, Afghanistan. And I loved it. I was traveling, I was seeing the world, and I was also seeing a lot of places that are very, very misunderstood. But I was also working on a lot of projects where I didn't feel particularly good about the information that I was exchanging, because it was basically building big sort of oil refineries, ports, projects where you were creating a bunch of slave labor jobs, more or less, and making a lot of people who were already rich a lot richer, and it didn't seem very interesting, and it didn't seem like very good sustainable development, but the jobs that I did really like were the ones in tourism. So if you are building a hotel, if you are building a tourism project, you are creating jobs at all ends of the economic spectrum. You're creating jobs for tour guides, for concierges, for restaurant workers, and it's an incredibly educational thing both for the traveler to come and spend money like that, and for the local populace. It helps promote stability and economic development, and that's kind of, so I just thought that this was something that I wanted to work on more. I wanted to figure out how we could get everyone in the world to travel a lot more. So I did this for a number of years. I was able to pay off my debt, put some money in the bank and savings, and then I was thinking, you know, what do I actually want to do in the world? I want to get people to travel. Why don't they? I really believe that people, I mean, how many of you would like to travel more than you usually do? I do believe that people have the inclination to travel. I even think that a lot of times people do have the time and even the money to travel, because travel doesn't have to be very expensive. And so, you know, I thought, why don't people? And I think it's because we're stuck with these tools and systems that are really, really out of date. Are any of you guys technical? Are you like programmers or anything? Developers? Okay, so some people. So if you go to Expedia, or kayak or something like this. It's basically you say, I want to go from New York to San Francisco March 16th, returning March 18th. That's basically like a database query. It's nothing more than that. And that's a really uninspiring way to plan your travel. So I first started, my first app was called Trip Common. I started teaching myself to code online using Code Academy. I wouldn't say that I'm a good developer, but I can hack things together. And I would say that anyone who has any inclination to build something tech-enabled should at least take like the first month worth or so of classes on Code Academy. It really doesn't take that much time. It's kind of fun. It's like a game. Also, weirdly, like helps me fall asleep. So started learning how to code and started building an app called Trip Common, which is a terrible name. The idea of Trip Common was, I was living in Istanbul at the time, so I live in Istanbul and my best friend lives in San Francisco and we want to meet up somewhere. What's the cheapest place we both can get to? And because sometimes that's London, sometimes that's New York, sometimes it's something completely unintuitive like Beijing is cheaper for both of us to get to. And so I thought that this would be something that would help friends or long distance couples or brothers and sisters or whatever get back together. So I was talking about this, thinking about doing this for honestly close to a year. And yet I had this job doing all this cool analysis stuff, working throughout the Middle East. I was making a ton of money. It was very hard to divorce myself from that and figure out when I was going to actually jump in. And I was sort of teaching myself how to code, but at a certain point, I had a friend who was like, "You've been talking about this for close to a year. Why don't you do something about it?" So I moved to, I went to a startup weekend. Are you guys familiar with startup weekends? Has anyone seen them? So they do them all over the place. I'd be shocked if there aren't some startup weekends happening every weekend here in the Bay Area. So it's usually the format is, I mean, there's an official organization called Startup Weekend, but people do knockoff versions all the time. So on Friday night, you show up somewhere, you pitch a business idea. There might be 100 people there. Everyone votes on the various pitches, and say the top 5 will end up being able to form teams. So if people like your idea, they might vote for it, and you might get to work on your idea, and if your idea isn't chosen, then you go and work on someone else's. So then there are 5 teams, you spend the entire weekend just trying to like make a startup, make a company, and there are mentors there to help coach you through. And then at the end of the weekend, there's usually some kind of contest. So I actually did 2 of these back to back. The first time my idea was chosen, which was great because I got a whole bunch of strangers working on my idea for a weekend. And we built a really interesting prototype, and we took 2nd place, and it was exciting that I did one the very next weekend and my idea wasn't chosen, so I worked on someone else's idea. And I really found both experiences incredibly worthwhile. And it's really, like, it's a total crash course in how you get a company off the ground. Like, what are we actually building? What are the first steps we need to do to validate whether this is a good idea? All this stuff. So, did the startup weekend, and I loved it. I loved every minute of it. So I wanted to dive in. I started building. I was trying to figure out how to build everything myself, and I was like, okay, I really need a co-founder. So, I was trying to put together, I was like, how do I find co-founders? Where do I look? There's something called founder dating. It's not romantic. It's just like a service. There's that. There's Hacker News. There are all sorts of different organizations. I ended up, but the more I looked around and I started, I emailed friends who were in tech. And I was like, yeah, hey, I want to find like a really brilliant developer who wants to work on my idea for free, and like they should be so brilliant that they're going to be giving up a job where they'd be making like $250,000 a year to come and work on my idea for free. That's pretty much what it boils down to for a lot of people who aren't, fully technical. And I realized like that's a terrible value proposition. Who's going to go for that? Frankly, there are a lot of not very technical people out there who are trying to recruit technical people to build their idea for free. And it's like, okay, what makes me different from all of those people? And I saw that, I was living in Istanbul. I had this gorgeous view out over the Bosphorus. I was watching the sunrise over like the continent of Asia, because Istanbul is half in Europe and half in Asia. And I was like watching this one morning. I was like, what can I do? How can I get someone to do this? And then I was like, wait, this is the best view ever. I can just put a picture of this view from my kitchen table and say, I will fly you to Istanbul for 2 weeks, for a minimum of 2 weeks, put you up in this crazy apartment where this will be your view. I would go sleep at a friend's house in exchange for you helping me build a prototype of my idea. And so I wrote up the job description exactly like that. Beautiful picture of a sunrise. This will be your view, free trip to Istanbul. I got friends who worked at Google, Facebook, a few other places to post this on their internal job boards. I started getting, I posted it on Hacker News. AngelList didn't exist yet. Sorry, when I say Hacker News, do people know what I mean? Sorry. Have you heard of Y Combinator? Y Combinator is an accelerator over on the other side of the bay. News.ycombinator.com is a website. I believe it's the predecessor to Reddit, but it works almost exactly the same way, except it's mostly just developers and tech people that read it and engage with it. It's a really fantastic community for anything tech related. Posted there, got fantastic applications, and that's how I found my co-founder. He was someone who was really, really intrigued by this idea. Flew him over to Istanbul, we hit it off, and amazingly, he remains my co-founder to this day. Talking about failures, we always thought that we really needed a third co-founder. So Timo is a really brilliant front-end developer and designer, but we thought we could use a great back-end person to balance it out. And also, you know, a three-legged stool is more stable than two, you know. I just thought that 3 was a good number. So we had 3 sort of amazing rookie mistakes along the way in recruiting our third co-founder. So the first one was, if you've ever heard the term, if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys, it's someone who's willing to work for next to nothing, there's probably a reason. So we met someone off a Ruby on Rails meetup mailing list, who was like, we want to pay someone like $3,000 a month, which is absurdly nothing for a developer. And he was the only one that replied, and he's like, yeah, sure, and I want to work on your idea, and I want X amount of equity, and we're like, let's talk about equity after we know each other a little bit. We worked with this guy. It took about 6 weeks for me to realize that he had no idea what he was doing, and I thought maybe I didn't know what I was doing because I was still very early on, but he was just like, I think he was not all mentally there. I'm not exactly sure. So that was and we had paid him for sort of 2 months by that point. So that was like $6,000 just gone. At this point, this was all my own money and savings funding this. So that was unfortunate. And then we moved on to the person who, so stereotype number 1 is the person who is willing to work for nothing is probably not actually worthwhile. Stereotype number 2 is the person who has an amazing job at Google, and why are they really interested in joining your startup? There was a guy who was an amazing engineer who worked for Google and was interested in our startup. And at this point, I packed up all my stuff from Istanbul and moved to the Bay Area to build my startup in the startup mecca. And this guy who wanted to be our third co-founder, he was doing some work for us for free because he's like, oh, because I still work at Google, so there might be IP concerns, so we should work for free. You shouldn't pay me while I'm just doing this. So when you're not paying someone, you don't have any leverage over them, and the communication was always very strange with this guy. I was like, what is actually motivating him to do this? I don't understand why he would want to work for free with us. And it basically turned out that he was trying to use it as leverage to get a pay raise, be like, oh, I'm going to go and join this startup to go do this. And as soon as he got that, he just stopped communicating with us. And it was like it was very confusing and yeah, just an interesting lesson. I don't know why someone would act that way, but I've weirdly talked to other people that have been in the exact same situation. And then our third person was, we're like, okay, we've wasted enough time and enough money on people that aren't really in this, so we're gonna find a really good candidate. I ran a really thorough process of trying to find someone to work with who's a really great back-end developer, who knew the travel industry, and I found someone, and he had founded a company that had gone bust, but he was right in our wheelhouse, he was right in our space, and the trick, the sort of catch with him was that he had founded a company that had failed, and he was not willing to work for free at all. He wanted market rate San Francisco developer salary, which is a lot of money. And so we ended up raising some money from friends and family and working with him for a little bit. Unfortunately, when you're paying market rate salary, and he didn't have very much equity as a consequence, there were sort of non-aligned incentives, and as soon as he sort of had done a couple months with us, he wanted to up his salary, and I just said, we really can't pay anymore, so he went and ended up consulting for someone else. So this was, at this point, this was like a year and dozens of thousands of dollars that we'd gone through. And all along this, we'd been trying to push Trip Common. We'd gotten the product out, we'd definitely gotten some users, but not very many. And at the end of close to a year, we'd had 9,000 total registrations on the site, which is actually, like, it's a lot, but it's not actually a lot. What we had to do to get those 9,000 registrations was just sort of use every connection we have, try and get every amount of press we had, and things like this. It was very difficult. And right along that time where I was kind of reaching the end of my rope of like what I thought I could put in, and I was like, something's not working here, something's not breaking. And then we met Luca, who ended up being our third co-founder. We met him. I met someone at a happy hour who knew Luca from online, like being diehard anime fans, and then who had met someone else at South by, and this all just sort of triangulated, and we met each other, and I sent him our sort of job description for back-end developer, CTO, potential co-founder position, and he wrote back, he's like, I don't want to sound cocky, but I think I might be perfect for this job. And we ended up talking in this sort of instant character fit. So after 3 strikes, when we sort of thought we were out, it just kind of came together. So it was just a lesson in sort of perseverance, and trying over and over and over again until we found the right fit. That being said, we found the right fit. I was really actually excited about the team, and we had a product that no one was really using. So even though our friends would try it out, it just didn't really stick. The truth of the matter is there aren't that many people that are planning these types of group travel reunions, coming from different places, want to go to a third place. And we kind of needed to build that, to prove that to ourselves, and it wasn't going anywhere. So we started doing these little mini hackathons within the team, like trying to figure out a better idea to work on. And we were like, what's the most dead simple thing we could do? And we wanted to build a mobile app. And so we thought, what about if we just had this sort of, Tinder had just come on the scene, and it was really kind of fun. We're like, what if we just had Tinder for cities? Like, you see a pretty picture of a city, and if you want to go, you swipe right. If you don't want to go, you swipe left. And if it's on your list of places you want to go, you get alerted when there's a cheap flight to get there. And we thought that would be kind of fun. We built a prototype version of it in a couple of days, and we put it out, and immediately people were like wild about it. People would like go through the entire list of cities we had, and we're like, there's something more here. And it was kind of amazing the difference between when someone was asking what my startup did and being like, oh, so it's like if you live here and your friend lives here and you kind of want to get together and you want to maybe meet in a third city and go on an adventure somewhere, but you don't really care where it is. That explanation versus tell us where you want to go and we alert you when there are cheap flights to get there. You know, in the first situation, everyone would kind of be like, okay, like maybe I know someone who would use it. And in the second situation, people are like, yes, how do I download it? Where do I get it? And it went from sort of 10% of people being really excited about what we were doing to like 95% of people being excited about what we were doing. And that was a really fantastic feeling to get onto something that was clearly working better. I could talk for ages about more mistakes that we've made, but I kind of, like I said, wanted to transition into a few things like productivity hacks at work and things like that that have worked for us, so I will do that. One thing that I think is more important than anything else is effective communication at scale. So keeping people informed about what you're doing, telling people what you're doing. One of my friends pointed out, he's like, why is Frank Lloyd Wright like the only architect that most people that has sort of like name recognition? It's because he spent like half of his time writing books about himself. Like there's something about documentation and communication and sharing what you're doing that makes a really big difference. So one thing that I started doing, and I didn't think about this, I didn't premeditate it, but I started sending out a monthly update about what we were doing at Hitlist right when we started. So September of 2013 was the first one of these that I sent out. And it was just like to our Hitlist friends and family, inner circle. And it always included a few basic things. So it would be, you know, an update on what we were doing, an update on what we'd been focused on for the past month and how well we'd done at it. Like last month's focus was hiring, and we found the designer that we wanted and we hired her and she's great. And so, yeah, how we done last month, what we were focusing on this month, and an ask. So always including something that people could help with, because at first people would be like, what can I actually do? And we'd be like, we're looking for a connection to someone at Fortune magazine or Forbes or something like this. The more specific, the better. Or the entire team is coming into New York City and we're looking for housing for 4 people in New York City. Or anything like this. So an ask, every single one of the things that I've asked for in one of these emails has been provided, which is kind of amazing. You know, basic updates about the company, but also something educational and different and kind of fun. Whether it's like, you know, a lot of you may have heard that Expedia bought Orbitz, and like this is the best article that explains why that happened and what that means for how much you're going to be paying for plane tickets, you know, in 2016 or something like that. So something educational that gives them a reason other than just their engagement with you to open the email. And then I try to, and then, you know, why we're doing this. Why is this important? Because someone's investing time in reading your email, so you want to give them something back. You want to give them a reason, not just, you know, what's in it for them. And then I always like to include a GIF. I like have such a great collection of GIFs, and that's it's one of those things that I've always wondered whether it was kind of unprofessional to include the GIF, and they're always super random. I've always, and then I had the good fortune of meeting the chairman of the chairman of Priceline, which most people do not realize is the 3rd largest e-commerce company in the world after Amazon and Alibaba. It's a $64 billion market cap company. So I met the chairman of Priceline, I added him to my update mailing list. In 1 month, like the gift didn't come through because I like sent the wrong file format. And he writes back, like he'd never responded to any of these before, and he's like, what was the gift this month? Seriously? You don't have better things to do? But okay. So you never know what sort of will strike a nerve. So communicating, sending these monthly updates is something, again, I just kind of did it because I thought it would be an interesting way to keep in touch. Every investor you ever speak to will be like, oh yeah, like keep in touch. Because most of them will say no, and then they'll say keep in touch. And so I always just did. And rather than try and send an email to everyone individually, it was easier to send this sort of digest. And what I've found is that it's had this unbelievable impact because people end up seeing the trajectory of our company, and I think a lot of people didn't take us seriously for a very long time, and then all of a sudden it sort of ticked over when we reached a certain level of traffic, when we reached a certain level of conversions, and I was able to I ended up publishing the posts on a blog, and I was able to go back and you can see like the entire evolution of what we did right and what we did wrong, and that's really helped people feel like they were along for the journey. I sometimes feel like, you know, we have three permanent, like we're 3 people on the team, and a couple part-time people, but I sort of feel like I have hundreds of extra employees or advocates, advisors, whatever you want to call it, easily have gotten over $500,000 worth of just free stuff from this. If you look at, I've asked for tickets to conferences, always gotten free tickets to conferences. I've asked for free housing in New York City. Like I said, I had like 4 people flying in for a meeting. I realized if I put them all up in hotels or Airbnb for like the full 2 weeks, it was gonna cost like 10 grand. And you know, this one guy who I'd met with once, he was an early Facebook employee. Barely knew him, and he replied to my email asking for this general email, and he's like, oh yeah, I'm going away for like all but 2 days. You can have my 2-bedroom loft in Greenwich Village, which is like the center of everything in New York City, which I'm sure rents for like $12K a month or whatever. I was like, yeah, you can just have it for free. If you don't mind, I'll be there for 2 days, and they can like, one person can sleep on the couch. And I was like, of course I don't mind. Like, it's your house. And definitely the most impactful one was I asked if anyone had a connection to the App Store. If you're ever developing an app, being featured in the App Store is one of the best, most amazing forms of user acquisition that you can't buy. The editorial feature when you open up your App Store, it says Best New Apps. Those slots are determined by a couple random people, not random, a couple very smart people in Cupertino. And they, it's worth easily the number 1, 2, and 3 slot, around 250,000 downloads in a week-long feature. We were in the number 4 slot, which is about 100,000 downloads. If you are trying to acquire users through paid app downloads, that's usually like $3 to $5. So unless you're really good at optimizing that, so I count that as like $300,000 worth minimum of like free stuff that we got through. Again, I just asked for an introduction to the App Store people from my mailing list, and that's how that came about. So communicating, and then just contact management in general. So in almost every case, the best way to get something done is not to like read blogs or teach yourself or do something like this. It's to find an expert and to get them to explain it to you. And in many cases, or even like do something for you, or like give you something, or do something for free that they would normally charge money for. And you can actually get this to happen if you just build up a relationship with people and make sure to give back. So I am really, really obsessed with contact management. And I have a personal system for basically anyone that I meet and anyone that I have a serious conversation with. And it's 5 steps. So the very first step is add them on LinkedIn. It's so simple. And if you actually have and maintain your LinkedIn network, it is just such a simple way to understand, to broaden your network. And if you're ever looking to meet someone, you know, the bigger your network is, you know, you're exponentially more likely to have connections in common with them. The more connections you have, just network effects. So add them on LinkedIn, then I write a really quick summary. And these summaries can be like 3 sentences long, or they can be much more detailed. So a quick summary of the email that I then send to myself. So I have this record of the meeting. I write, and I always call it a recap with a K, R-E-K-A-P. So for example, if I'm meeting with a like really famous investor like Fred Wilson or something like this, I want to have a record of that meeting. Fred Wilson is the lead investor in Union Square Ventures, one of the general partners there. Union Square Ventures were early investors in things like Twitter and Foursquare. Although you guys probably don't use Foursquare. Makes me old. So if I just like look in my inbox for Fred Wilson or something, I'm not going to find the summary because he's mentioned in all these newsletters and things like this. But if I can type in recap with a K, Fred Wilson, then I'll just get the summary. So I can remind myself about what we talked about the next time I see him. And when you're having like 6 to 10 meetings a day, you're not going to remember everything unless you're superhuman. So having notes really helps. So step 1 is to add them on LinkedIn. Step 2 is to write a recap and send it to yourself. I use a system called Streak, which is an amazing Gmail plugin. And I can use that to snooze emails, so I can set it to come back to me when I want to follow up with that person. So if we've been talking about something and we have a deal in progress, it's probably about a week before I want to re-engage with them if they haven't read me, so I'll have the summary bounce back to me in a week. If it's someone that I just kind of want to keep in touch with, I'll set it for a month or maybe even 2 or 3 months from now, but then it reminds me to sort of keep the relationship coming. So that's step 2. Step 3 is to tag the person in my contacts database. So I have my inner circle list, so if it feels like there's someone that I want to keep updated about how the company is doing, I'll put them on that list. That goes out every month. But then I also thought about what are the most important things to me as an entrepreneur about this person. And so or just sort of what types of people are most important to me. For me, it's investors. I always want to know more. They're just very useful people. Number 2 is press. Again, for getting your story out there, press can be really, really useful. 3 is other founders, because you tend to have a lot of resources to share with each other. There's a common feeling. Developers, it's always useful to have more developer talent. And for me, personally, the travel industry people. So if someone fits in any of those categories, I make sure to tag them. So I use something called Full Contact to keep track of the people in my database. So I'll tag them with any of those. And then if they're associated with, if I have time, I'll also tag them with whatever geography, like this is a New York-based person or a Boston-based person, or this person splits their time between San Francisco and LA, where they went to school if it's relevant, and any, sometimes sort of more obscure tags like this, where like this is like an email marketing person, this person's involved in politics or fashion tech or whatever. But what this enables me to do is when I see something come across my radar that's like, there's a really amazing discount on AWS credits or something that I have access to for whatever reason, I can basically go to my database, I can pull out all of the developers and founders that I know who are probably people who appreciate free AWS credits. Sorry, AWS is Amazon Web Services. If you ever are building an app or hosting it or something, it's very useful. And I can email all these people and be like, hey, free AWS credits code. And because it's a simple query in my contacts database, I can send this out to like 200 people. I just did 200 people a favor. And I've sort of built up karma and credit that I might be able to, pull back sometime if I need a favor for them. And I hope this doesn't sound too Machiavellian or anything like this, but the entire business world is give and take in relationships. And I just think it's really important to, whenever you get access to something, whenever you find out something cool, if you can share it with people and build up credit in some way, that's great, and you should do it. And being able to have a system that allows you to reach people at scale is really great. So I'm almost done, I promise. So again, number 1, add on LinkedIn. Number 2, write the recap and send it to yourself. Number 3, tag the person with the appropriate tags and put them into your database. Number 4 is write the person a follow-up email. Even if there isn't something that you explicitly need to go over, just saying like, thanks for taking the time to meet. It was really great to meet you. Is really simple, and it also cements the fact when it comes back to later, like you actually had a meeting. It's useful sometimes. Again, like at this point I'm 3.5 years into having a company, Trip Common for a year, which failed, and 2.5 years into Hitlist, and I have talked to thousands of people, possibly tens of thousands of people, and if I didn't have a system to keep track of this, I wouldn't know that. Write the follow-up email to them. And finally, the 5th element, which so few people do, and if you do, it will distinguish you and get you a lot of karma, credit, whatever you want to call it, is write a thank you email to whoever introduced you, if someone introduced you. Because chances are, if you are talking to someone, you got an introduction from someone. I introduce people to people all the time, and then I have no idea what happened. Like, did they actually follow up with that person? Was it useful at all? And so when someone writes me and is like, oh yeah, hey, like thanks for this, or hey, that guy you introduced me to is a total blowhard and a total waste of time, like just FYI. Either way, I'm really happy to know. And so that's, I always appreciate it as someone who introduces, and several people have told me, they're like, you are the only person who actually follows up on that type of stuff, and I think it's really helped distinguish me and helped me get further faster. So yeah, I feel like I've talked for a while. I want to leave some time for Q&A. I have many more things to talk about, but if anyone has questions, I can talk to a few things. I can talk to finding people to work on, identifying a problem to work on, raising capital, which is a harrowing and terrible process that is in most cases a necessary evil. Anything on there? Yes?
How many investors did you have to go to get funded?
I have talked to 313 investors. So we have raised just under $1 million. We have 18 investors at this point. Yeah, it's a really shitty ratio.
Is it still pre-series, Series A, or?
Yeah, I mean, so this whole myth that fundraising comes in rounds is largely a myth. There are some people who are great fundraisers and who do manage to raise, $1 million seed or whatever, things like this. We raised, we spent about a year raising about $500,000, and so you could call that, in this day and age, that kind of counts as a pre-seed. And then we had a round, we went out to raise a round last year, and rookie fundraising mistake, found a VC who is not a sort of top tier VC, but he was the first one to say like, yeah, sure, I'll lead your round, I'll put in $500K. And I rounded up $800,000 worth of people to follow on his investment. And he ended up drying out the negotiations for 2 months, and because we were in the due diligence process, he knew exactly what our financials were, so he knew exactly how much we had, about 3 months runway when we started this. So he kept on drying out the negotiations, kept on asking for more, and then we were basically 3 weeks from totally running out of money. And he was like, and I was like, seriously, we've done everything, like we've gone over everything, let's just close this round. Like, let's close this, we have $1.3 million in the bank, we can start working on the next phase. Like, as an investor, don't you want us to close this? He's like, actually, I'm only gonna give you the money if you knock $3 million off your valuation. Classic dick VC move. It happens all the time, and I fell for it because that's what a lot of people do when they're inexperienced. I've since learned that this particular VC is like even known for doing this, so I feel especially stupid for falling for it. So I was at that point in a position where it's like, say yes to this guy, and I have $1.3 million in the bank, which is a crazy amount of money, right? And I can get to building the vision, can get on to the next thing, but this guy has like a significant chunk of my company. And I didn't trust him at all anymore, and he knew exactly what he was doing when he was doing this, and I realized that he'd played me, and he probably would try and play me again. My co-founder, the third one to join, the back-end guy, was like, we have to take the money, I'm sick of being like, just sort of effectively like barely funding it to micro team. And I was like, no, we can't do this. So I went to the $800,000 worth of people that I'd lined up to follow on, and most of them were like, actually, you know, I asked them if they would come in without the lead investor. And the vast majority of them were like, no, we signed up to be part of a $1 million plus round, it's too risky if we're not, we're out. But $150,000 worth, so that was 5 investors. We're like, yeah, you know, we believe in you, we believe in the team, we believe there's something here, we'll come in anyway. So that gave us enough breathing room that we weren't completely running out of money, but it was a horrible, horrible time, because it also led to major friction between my co-founder and me, because he was like, I signed up to build a team, to do this big thing, not to be like the guy in the trenches coding. And I was like, well, I mean, like, I would like that to happen too, but, and he's like, you mismanaged this process, which was true. It was a big, big failure of mine. It ended up leading to a, like, we ended up separating ways very amicably, because he had a kid on the way, he just needed more stability, and he, like you said, he didn't want to be just like coding in the trenches, he wanted to be building something bigger, so we ended up recruiting a different person to come in and take his place. Like, all in all, it worked out, but it was a tough year. So we never ended up raising that big amount of money, but what we ended up doing was getting relentless about getting to profitability, which we have now done. We are, as of this month, cash flow positive, which is, I mean, we had revenue from the very early days, but our revenue exceeds our monthly outlay, which is like very strange in Silicon Valley. For most people are like, no, you've got to invest in growth. And I'm like, I'm very, very skeptical of the venture capital sort of system. It obviously works very well for some people. We probably will raise a round at some point, but we were encouraged to get our house in order because of that. And at the end of the day, like, we've had acquisition offers for a very significant amount of money. We now have a lot of investors who have approached us, and it's just a very different field, but it was, it's so much better to be in this situation than it was to be in the situation we were in a couple months ago. Don't trust VCs. Moral of the story. Yes?
What did you study in college?
I kind of feel like I studied rowing. I like rowed 25 hours a week, and studies were sort of accessory to that. I studied government. I don't think it was very relevant to what I ended up doing, but I did government because I started out in math physics, and then when I decided to switch majors, I'd like already taken all the distribution requirements, and I could graduate in as little time as possible. That's what I did. Yes?
At any point in time, did you like feel like quitting and just finding some other job? Like you said, that's 4 co-founders, right? That you switched?
Yeah.
And then the VC thing?
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, and this is something that I think can't be overstated. A huge luxury that I had as a founder is that I had, you know, real world work experience, and to the point where I was, my job that I ended up in consulting I was making as much money as I ever could imagine wanting in life, like stupid amounts of money for an early 20-something-year-old. And so I was like, okay, I've proven that I can like make money. What I want to do is like make an impact, build something I believe in, like do this. And so I never knew how hard it would be, but there's never been a point where I've just wanted to stop. Like I've even had we've had some acquisition offers that would make me a multimillionaire, which is kind of cool. We've had some things where, I'd be able to, I've had some job offers that have been like kind of crazy dream jobs, but I love what I'm doing. And that's much more important than money or, like, I care about money, I'm not like an aesthetic, but, yeah, no, I love what we're building, I love what we're doing. I've definitely wondered whether we were the right team, whether we were doing it right. Like I've had doubts about whether exactly how we're going about it is right, but I've never had doubts that this is what I want to be doing. Yes.
Can you talk for a second about the bag? Just like your lifestyle. I just thought that was really fascinating.
Sure. So I've moved around a lot, I've traveled a lot. I've always hated having to deal with bags, and I also, I started many years ago sort of paring down my possessions and trying to own very little in general. And then I kind of went a little bit more radical. About 4 months ago, I decided to try and get down to like 1 or 2 outfits, which is something that frankly a lot of really productive people do, is like have just like a uniform. And like Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates and all these people and like Barack Obama, like they all have like one thing. So it's something, it's a good track record. So yeah, this is everything I own in this totality. So this plus, sorry, to be honest, I also have a winter jacket and boots, which are in Boston right now. But it makes me mobile, it leaves a lot of extra space, so I need to be able to do laundry every like 4 days. That's like the one inconvenience of having this few things. But other than that, like it's, I can't advocate it strongly enough. Having fewer things gives you the flexibility to live where you want, go where you want, do whatever you want. So I'm happy to go over exactly what's in it, but I think the class is almost done, so I don't want to go over, yeah.
How did you get the very first downloads from the App Store?
Our very first downloads were like people that we knew, was our mailing list. So, like I emailed to like 500 people and asked them to download the app. But we also, the first real spike we got was a story that the Next Web did. And I have no idea, like I tried to pitch a bunch of journalists, no one was biting, and then this one guy was like, oh, this is kind of cool. He wrote about it. We got 6,000 downloads, like close to 6,000 downloads in the day. And then Lifehacker picked it up, and then some random blog in Greece picked it up. And for like 2 weeks, Greeks were our #1 like download. And I was like, oh look, like there's some budget conscious Greeks after all. Sorry, appropriate. And any Greeks in the room? Sorry. Yeah, customer acquisition is a crazy important thing to talk about and like a much longer story, but press is a good method.
So you know this journalist?
Did I what?
You know him?
I didn't know him when I pitched him. No, I found him through Twitter.
Okay.
But yeah, following Twitter is amazing. In terms of, it's still a relatively small group of people that you can find a lot of things. By the way, I know class is over. If you gotta go, or I think, right? Isn't it over?
Yeah, we should wrap up, yeah.
Yeah.
But if you wanna, like, I'm sure if anyone else has questions, you can stay for like a few minutes or something.
Yeah,
if you have
absolutely.
questions, so, yeah, thank you so much.
Speaking of Twitter, I'm Gillian, Gillian with a G, and I'm G at hitlist app.com. I am not lying when I say I will answer your email if you email me, and you should email me if you have questions. I might not answer immediately, and if I don't answer after a week, ping me again, but the entire entrepreneurial world works on people helping each other, and I am, like I said, like, I love what I do, I wanna help other people do things like this, so if there's anything I can do to help you,